All right, we're gonna go ahead and pull the clutch cover off on this Honda Fourtrax 300. We loosened up all the 8mm bolts around the outside. We're just gonna take those off while you're watching, that way you can see where all of them are. Just basically around the outside. Now, on this model, you do not have to take the oil filter cover off. There's no bolts underneath of there. I'd suggest replacing your oil filter when you're doing any kind of motor work at all. So 3 8mm bolts that we pulled off there. We already pulled the oil filter off of there, but I just wanted to show you there's no bolts down inside of this cover. Like I said, some models there are, and you don't need to pull that cover to get that clutch cover off. Now, I'm going to go ahead and pull these sensors off since we're here. It's a 14mm to get these off. Two sensors. And it actually takes a deep. A deep 14, but mine's an impact. There you go. Got both those off, and then that wire harness we pulled off in the previous video will go with these two sensors, as well as this larger sensor that we're going to try to get to now. And there's your larger sensor there. So make sure we've got all three there, and that goes with the wire harness that we pulled off earlier. So check that video if you're needing to look at that. This is the cover that was on top of that to kind of protect those wires. Now we're going to pull this clutch cover off here. What I can do, you can take a rubber hammer, kind of tap on it, and then I pull up at the same time. Now this has got a seal that goes around the outside, and a lot of times what happens is that seal kind of holds it into place. So what I do a lot of times, I'll take a little bit of pressure, pull up on it, just tap on it there. That just the jarring of that steel hammer just works a whole lot easier. We're going to pull this out. I think that Kickstarter gear pulled up with it, but clutch cover is now off. Now I was showing you when we adjusted that clutch there, what that was doing is putting pressure on this and adjusting this. So that's what we were doing when we were adjusting your clutch, which was the 14mm and the flat screwdriver on that side. Now the other thing, the other thing that I told you I was going to show you is your shift shaft went all the way through. It went and hooked up to this, and when you're putting this back together, you see there's a dot there on this shaft. There's also an arrow down here that you probably can't see very well, but on your crankcase, you want to make sure that those are lined up, and that's going to put this gear in the correct position. Also, you're going to want to move that to wherever it needs to go to line that up. And then that adjuster that I was showing you will fit right in there, going back together. Now, we've got your centrifugal clutch here, your inner, your outer, and then we've got your clutch basket here with your Kickstarter assembly here. Now this is spring loaded, and you can saw that it came up when we were pulling this clutch cover off. You want to make sure that you get that in the right place going back together. This spring will hook on the top of your case there, and then what happens is when you kick that gear, when you get to it, when it slides back, it'll engage into there. So got your spring there, and then it'll fit down in there, and then you got to turn it to line it up. So I'll show you that when we put everything back together. So that's your Kickstarter gear there. We got an 1 1/16 nut here to pull the centrifugal clutch off. And I like to take a finger and a lot of times a rag and kind of just hold this clutch. All right, this is reverse threaded, so you want to make sure that you're turning this clockwise to remove it. So clockwise will remove it. And then your cam chain, if you're spinning this clutch over, your cam chain will hit, so you want to make sure you lift that up if you turn it over. Now these clutches can be a bit of a bear. They make a clutch puller, but you don't actually have to have that. It just takes a little bit of time. You can take a hammer and tap on the back of this clutch. You don't want to hit it a whole bunch just to damage that, but sometimes it just takes the right movement to get that off of there. I like to take and put pressure on this side as well when we're doing that, so that you're not just tapping on one side and you can take and spin it. There we go. And they come off there, and they both come off there, the inner and the outer at the same time. So you've got a one-way gear in behind here. This will be removed. Putting this back together, you want to make sure that the outside is, just like it says, facing the outside. So that's your centrifugal clutch going back together. Now you've got the gear that sits in behind your centrifugal clutch there. And that gear we won't be able to pull off until we pull the oil pump off, as well as the clutch basket. So we'll just leave that for the time being. And we'll pull your oil pump. And that's a 10 millimeter to get this cover off here. And then to get your oil pump off, you got to remove this oil line. And one of the lines is in behind this clutch basket, so we're going to remove that. Here's your guide and your chain. You can see a little bit better there, but we'll get all the way down to it. I do this in a cross pattern. They are spring loaded, and I've seen it before where there's been too much tension on just one side. If you just go all the way up with all three of them and your last one's the only one holding, and I've seen it break that clutch basket before. So you want to make sure you go in a cross pattern removing those. Just set these aside here. Now what we're going to do is pull this larger nut here. Again, it's that 1/16", and I hold it again. This is just regular threads, so just counterclockwise to remove this. You got a special washer here. You want to make sure that goes back on, and it says outside on it. I don't know why. Well, one side's rounded, I guess, a little bit more. So now what we can do, I like to make sure that'll come up. Now I put these springs back in here, and this will hold everything together until we go back together. So that way plates aren't getting spread out, and parts aren't getting lost. So again, tighten it back up, crisscross pattern. And those need to be torqued, and a lot of times you like to replace those springs, especially if you're needing to do clutch work at all. So there's your clutch basket there, and what you can do now, which is nice, is you can pull this all out together and inspect that clutch basket really good, make sure everything's where it needs to be there. Alright, got a lot of 10 millimeter bolts in there. I'm going to go ahead and remove this other oil line bolt. There's two more. This one here is the banjo bolt, like I showed you earlier, and now we're ready to pull that oil line off. We'll pull that oil pump, three 10 millimeter bolts. And then what I do, and now that gear will come up with it there. There's the other gear to your centrifugal clutch, the outer housing that just slides in there like that. What I do then, keep all this together, take and I'll set my guard for my oil pump back down in here. You can see that there's a dowel pin that fell off. Show you that in just a second here. Alright, there's the oil pump. Dowel pin that fell off when I was pulling that oil pump off. Oh, it's right here. And that just sits down there to keep that oil pump in place. Lower guide here, this front guide there, just remove that with a 10 millimeter bolt. That'll slide up and out of there. It's got a spacer as well. And then our cam chain guide now will just come right down out the bottom. A lot of times if these bind up, a lot of times what happens is you break this area here or here. So you want to make sure that you don't turn that motor while that cam chain is not where it in place there. Got an Allen bolt here, 5mm Allen to remove this shift mechanism, and you don't want to put an impact on that, especially until you get it into place to turn it. A lot of times if you put an impact on it right away, it'll spin so fast it can break your shift forks on the other side. So I just like to use a hand Allen like this instead of using an impact, especially to get it started. These other 10mm that you see here, you don't have to remove those if you're just putting the motor back together. I'll remove those just to kind of show you how everything works, but if you're just going down into the motor, you don't need to replace or remove those. We've got pins sitting in here. There's 2 pins. One of them stayed on that side, and the other one fell off here. And they're spring loaded. Oh, maybe these aren't spring loaded. I'm going to remove those for now, just so we're not losing those. Here's your Kickstarter arm here. Let's set that with the Kickstarter. Now I'm going to flip this motor over. We're going to pull this output shaft off. Like I said before in a previous video, you don't have to. It's very difficult, but you can remove just this output. What I've done before is made them into 4-wheel drives. So to make a Fourtrax into a 4-wheel drive, you're going to have to switch out this housing here, as well as your cover where your stator sits. This cover is going to have a groove in it. So switch this out. What I did was set this motor perfectly straight up and down. We're not going to go through the whole process. Well, I guess we will. If you have this output shaft for a 4-wheel drive ready to go, all you need is take your 12mm socket here and remove these 3 bolts. Oops. Okay, now this will slide out. And what we do, if this motor is perfectly flat, I'd set it up on blocks, and so that no gears were falling around in place, because once we pull this shaft out, it goes all the way through, and pieces will fall down where you don't want them to. See, it loosened up there. Now, you saw that seal kind of broke there, so we're able to, now we're getting close. The ones I've switched out in the past haven't been this difficult to pull apart, but it seems like that's been everything on this machine. So we're getting close there. We don't want to just jerk this thing out, especially when its motor's sitting the way that it is. Otherwise it will, your gears again will just drop down in there, and that's not what you want. I'm going to pull this off here so we can get a better hit on there without ruining this boot. This boot here just hooks right up to that swing arm. Protects that rear output shaft, that U-joint assembly. All right, boot is off. I'm going to take and all right, it's getting close to coming out now. So what we're going to do, in my block here, I would set this motor up a little bit better so it's straight up and down. Then you can just take this, pull it straight up. Now again, this I'm not doing it perfectly because I don't have a block to set this on, but you can pull this up. Now what you can do, going back in, take your four-wheel drive output, put it in there, set it down, and then you can actually take, and if I wasn't having to hold this motor, I could show you, but you can take and kind of turn this slightly to get those lined up to where it needs to be, till it goes all the way down. You don't want to, you don't ever want to force it in, you don't want to take a hammer and hit it, because that's going to jar everything, nothing's going to fit right. So now that we've got it, and I'm going to attempt to put this back in, just kind of show you, but then also to hold gears while we split this crankcase. Now, like I said, yeah, it's going to be next to impossible without a block. Yep, there they start falling. So once they fall, you've got to split that crankcase, but it is possible to do it without. And just makes a two-wheel drive motor, four-wheel drive, very quick. So we've got our crankcase bolts around the outside here, and I loosened a lot of them just to speed things up. And we've got our shift mechanism here that we need to take apart as well before we split that case. All right, got 10 millimeter. Spring-loaded arm here, so just be a little careful with that. And then this is all the shift detent. Want to be really careful taking all this apart. A lot of pieces here. Try to keep them together. I'm just going to try to keep it all together, but that may not work. I'm just going to pull this up, try to keep the pieces together. So this shift detent here, if you can see, these are arms here and they're spring loaded. As soon as I set it down, I'm guessing they're going to pop out of place. Not very often can you keep them together without holding them. So they sit in here. And as soon as I get this off, clean that up here so we don't have as much debris in there. Here's your shift arm here. That's the spring-loaded piece. Then these hold this shift drum in place. So there's two of these, one on either side. Oh, that's right. This shift mechanism, you've got to pull that out with a socket, 12 millimeter socket. I like to spin this slowly so we're not breaking anything. And then it's got a pin that it lines up with as well. And these fit down in there. I don't know that I've ever had one stay together as good as this one is. I think this top plate is kind of holding it together, but all right. Now we're ready to split this case. Some of the gears are kind of already falling out of place there from when we did that, but take a rubber mallet now. A couple different places you can tap. You want to make sure, verify that you got all the bolts out. Looks like everything's out, so Should come apart. It's easy to miss one, especially if your motor's dirty. This is a good spot to hit here, fairly strong if you're using a rubber mallet. Make sure we got them all. Sometimes you can tell if one spot's not breaking free. It looks like it's getting stuck down here, but I don't see anything that's holding us up. Take the hammer here and tap down here. This is and I found the culprit. There was one in here that was stuck with dirt, and I found the reason why it's not coming apart. Frustrating when that happens, but it is completely covered in dirt. There we go. And now I bet this case is just going to break apart now. All right, now let's set this motor up like that. What I like to do is take and get my fingers underneath in the cases if you can. And if those gears were still intact, we had to flip the motor on the other side, try to keep them all on that shaft that we removed. And if you can get your fingers in there and just kind of start rocking it back and forth. I like to try to move around a little bit so we're not stuck in one certain area. I think the crank is what's holding us in here, and we've got our gears that had fallen down, but we'll just have to let those fall then, clean those all up. So your crankshaft is here. A lot of the gears, this shaft ran through right there, so a lot of these gears are on there, but we'll have to look at the microfiche, look at the repair manual and see where those go. But that is a shift fork here, got your shift drum here, and your transmission gears there. So that is a crankcase split on a Fourtrax 300 four-wheeler.